Hells Angels have long stood as the ultimate symbol of outlaw motorcycle culture. From humble beginnings to international notoriety, these rebellious figures have shaped the club's fearsome reputation through their actions, leadership, and unflinching loyalty. Behind the leather jackets and death's head patches exist men whose extraordinary lives have become legendary. Criminals, influencers, leaders, and survivors who've made the Hells Angels the world's most infamous motorcycle club. Here are some individuals that are famous for their works as a Hells Angel. Number 10. Christian Eckerlin. In the dark underbelly of Frankfurt, where secrets and shadows intertwine, Christian Eckerlin rises to defy all expectations. Born in the bleak November of 1986, this unassuming boy from a town near Frankfurt has transformed into a remarkable figure who bridges two seemingly contradictory worlds: professional MMA fighter and patched Hells Angels member. Unlike many who joined the club seeking rebellion or brotherhood, Eckerlin first pursued a conventional dream: becoming a professional football player. His relentless ambition earned him a contract with SV Darat 98, where he spent years toiling in the second league. But when football success proved elusive, fate steered him toward a different path. Since age 15, Eckerlin had been honing his boxing skills alongside his football pursuits. A pivotal moment came during a party altercation when he defended himself against 4 attackers, leaving 3 sprawled on the ground. This display of fighting prowess caught the attention of professional MMA fighter Daniel W.L., who invited Eckerlin to train in mixed martial arts. The world of MMA became Eckerlin's new passion. His exceptional dedication was immediately apparent to trainers. "Christian as a fighter is a very dedicated guy," one coach observed. "When he comes to the gym, he is there 100% and tries to give 100% of himself." This obsession propelled him into a whirlwind professional career by age 19. While establishing himself as a fighter, Eckerlin led a double life, competing in the cage by day and working as a bodyguard at a strip club owned by powerful Hells Angels member Schnitzel Walter by night. It was here that destiny intervened when he met Dominique, the boss's daughter, in an elevator incident that became the stuff of legend. Their chance encounter blossomed into romance, creating personal ties to the club that would eventually become professional. Recognizing the importance of sponsorship in the MMA world, Eckerlin secured backing from Walter Burkhard, Schnitzel Walter, the influential German Hells Angel. This partnership launched Eckerlin to new heights as he trained with world champions like Georges St-Pierre and developed into a formidable competitor. Success followed quickly: 6 consecutive victories, the GMC Welterweight Championship, and recognition for Knockout of the Year in 2010. Though he faced setbacks against experienced fighters in the Russian M1 Global League, Eckerlin never stayed down. His 2022 rematch victory through a rear naked choke solidified his reputation as a legitimate MMA talent. What makes Eckerlin truly unique in Hells Angels history is his transparency. Unlike traditional members who operate in shadows, he proudly showcases his life on social media. His training regimens, family moments, and extravagant lifestyle featuring a Lamborghini Urus, Porsche Cayenne, Ferrari 812 GTS, and Porsche 911. With over 170,000 YouTube subscribers and 44 million views, he's become an influential figure who bridges outlaw motorcycle culture and mainstream sports celebrity. Despite his intimidating fighting career, those close to Eckerlin describe a different man in private: a calm, loving father who defies the aggressive stereotypes associated with both MMA fighters and Hells Angels members. His next ambition extends beyond personal success. He aims to fundamentally transform the German MMA scene while simultaneously rising through the ranks of the Hells Angels. Eckerlin represents a new chapter in Hells Angels history, a member who thrives in the public eye rather than hiding from it. While his predecessor, Vladimir Stadnik, operated in shadows and used secrecy as protection, Eckerlin's open approach demonstrates how the club continues evolving in the social media age. finding new ways to project power and influence without sacrificing its essential identity. Number 9. David Wolf Carroll. David Wolf Carroll rose through the ranks to become one of the most feared Hells Angels enforcers in Canada during the 1980s and 1990s. Born in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, Carroll earned his fearsome reputation through unwavering loyalty and a calculated approach to violence that made him indispensable to the organization. As a member of the elite Nomad chapter in Quebec, Carroll distinguished himself through his methodical execution of club business. Unlike impulsive enforcers, Carroll was known for his patience and precision. His calculated approach made him particularly effective at eliminating problems while minimizing risk to the organization. Law enforcement sources documented Carroll's involvement in numerous murders, though the actual number is suspected to be significantly higher. Carroll's rise within the Hells Angels ecosystem began in his hometown of Dartmouth, where he established himself as a dominant figure in the local biker scene. His leadership of the Halifax-based 13th Tribe Motorcycle Club in the late 1970s demonstrated his natural authority and strategic thinking long before he joined the Angels. When the 13th Tribe became absorbed into the Hells Angels' expanding Canadian network, Carroll's exceptional abilities quickly became apparent to national leadership. What distinguished Carroll from typical enforcers was his approach to violence, cold, calculated, and completely devoid of emotion. He treated enforcement like a military operation, gathering intelligence on targets, planning contingencies, and executing with precision that left minimal evidence. This psychological discipline extended to Carroll's personal presentation. Unlike many Hells Angels who embraced flamboyant displays of wealth and power, Carroll maintained a deliberately understated appearance, driving modest vehicles and living in unremarkable homes that drew minimal attention. By the early 1990s, Carroll had been elevated to the prestigious Nomads chapter, an elite unit within the Hells Angels structure comprised of the organization's most effective and trusted members. Freed from geographic restrictions that limited regular chapters, Nomads operated throughout Canada, addressing high-priority situations and overseeing cross-regional operations. This position gave Carroll unprecedented authority, allowing him to move between territories while commanding respect even from chapter presidents. His partnership with Maurice "Mom" Boucher proved particularly consequential for the Canadian criminal landscape. While Boucher provided charismatic leadership and organizational vision, Carroll supplied the cold tactical execution necessary to implement their ambitious plans. Together, they transformed the Hells Angels from a collection of loosely affiliated chapters into a highly coordinated criminal enterprise that dominated Canada's illegal drug markets. Carroll's influence was perhaps most evident in his native Halifax, where he maintained direct oversight despite spending much of his time in Quebec. Former Halifax chapter members described how the atmosphere would transform instantly upon news of his impending visits, with frantic preparation and tension permeating the clubhouse. Carroll's criminal empire began unraveling in the late 1990s when Canadian authorities implemented unprecedented measures to combat outlaw motorcycle violence. Operation Springtime 2001, a massive coordinated investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies, finally penetrated the layers of security Carroll had established around himself. In March 2001, as arrests were being made across Quebec and Nova Scotia, Carroll disappeared completely. His vanishing act, occurring just hours before police arrived to arrest him on multiple murder charges, demonstrated the exceptional intelligence network he had cultivated throughout his criminal career. While dozens of other Angels leaders were apprehended in the operation, Carroll somehow received advance warning and escaped, taking with him extensive knowledge of the organization's most sensitive operations and financial arrangements. Despite one of the most extensive manhunts in Canadian history, involving international cooperation through Interpol and other agencies, Carroll has never been located. Theories about his fate range from a new identity in South America to a secret burial after being eliminated by Angels leadership, concerned about what he might reveal if captured. Like Adam Lee Hall, who would later follow a similar path in the United States, Carroll represented the evolution of the Hells Angels, from disorganized rebels to sophisticated criminals. Both men understood that the club's survival depended on adapting to changing times while maintaining the core identity that made the Hells Angels legendary in the outlaw world. Number 8. Adam Lee Hall. Adam Lee Hall rose to notoriety as the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Berkshire County chapter of the Hells Angels in Massachusetts during the early 2000s. Unlike many Hells Angels who grew up in the biker culture, Hall came to the organization later in life, bringing with him a particularly calculating and cold-blooded approach to criminal activity. Born in 1977, Hall's criminal career began with auto theft and drug dealing before he caught the attention of the Hells Angels leadership. His rapid ascension through the ranks was fueled by his willingness to handle the club's most violent business without hesitation or remorse. As Sergeant-at-Arms, Hall was responsible for discipline within the chapter and protection from external threats, duties he approached with ruthless efficiency. What distinguished Hall from typical enforcers was his methodical, almost scientific approach to violence. While other Hells Angels might resort to impulsive beatings or intimidation, Hall planned his attacks with military precision. He maintained detailed information on targets' habits, routines, and weaknesses. Intelligence he would exploit when violence became necessary. This calculating approach earned him respect from senior members who valued his reliability in handling sensitive matters. Hall's childhood provided few indications of the calculated criminal he would become. Raised in Western Massachusetts in a working-class family, his early years were marked by academic struggles and behavioral issues that hinted at underlying psychological problems. Former teachers described a disturbing duality, a student capable of charm and intelligence when it suited him, yet exhibiting an unsettling emotional detachment that manifested in calculated manipulation of both peers and authority figures. Hall's entry into the Hells Angels ecosystem came through his involvement in the Massachusetts drug trade during the late 1990s. Initially working as an independent dealer with connections to several outlaw motorcycle clubs, he distinguished himself through both reliability and ruthlessness in protecting his territory. These qualities attracted attention from the Berkshire County chapter of the Hells Angels, who began utilizing his services for collections and enforcement before eventually inviting him to prospect for membership. Upon receiving his full patches and the position of Sergeant-at-Arms, Hall immediately began modernizing the chapter's operations. Under his influence, the Berkshire County Hells Angels expanded beyond traditional motorcycle club criminal activities into more sophisticated and profitable ventures. He established connections with suppliers in neighboring states to improve their drug distribution network, implemented new money laundering procedures through seemingly legitimate businesses, and developed more effective security protocols to evade law enforcement surveillance. This organizational transformation yielded immediate financial benefits for the chapter. Under Hall's guidance, profits from drug distribution increased substantially, while arrests decreased due to improved operational security. He established a sophisticated system of cutouts and intermediaries that insulated patched members from direct involvement in the most legally dangerous aspects of their business, creating layers of deniability that frustrated prosecution efforts. However, Hall's methodical approach to criminal enterprise was matched by an equally calculated approach to personal violence that eventually proved his undoing. In July 2009, he brutally assaulted David Glasser, whom he suspected of stealing one of his motorcycles. The attack, in which Hall beat Glasser with a baseball bat and forced him to sign over his truck title, demonstrated both his capacity for violence and his fundamental misunderstanding of how far his influence actually extended. When Glasser reported the assault to local police, rather than submitting to Hall's intimidation, it began an escalating series of events that would ultimately lead to multiple murders. Initially, Hall attempted to discredit Glasser as a witness by framing him for a fake armed robbery in New York State. When this elaborate scheme failed to prevent Glasser's testimony, Hall's approach took an even darker turn. In August 2011, as his trial date approached, Hall orchestrated what prosecutors would later describe as one of the most calculated and cold-blooded crimes in Massachusetts history. With the assistance of associates David Chalou and Caius Viovis, he abducted Glasser from his Pittsfield apartment. In a decision that reflected both tactical elimination of witnesses and a disturbing level of sadism, the group also took Glasser's roommate Edward Frampton and their friend Robert Chadwell, who were present at the time. The subsequent murders shocked even veteran law enforcement officials with their brutality. After torturing the victims, Hall and his accomplices killed all three men, dismembered their bodies with power tools, and buried the remains in a trench on private property in Beckett. This gruesome methodology exceeded what was necessary to eliminate witnesses, suggesting a level of pathological pleasure in the violence that went beyond rational criminal calculation. The investigation that followed revealed the limitations of Hall's criminal sophistication. Despite his careful planning of the abductions and murders, he made critical errors in the aftermath that quickly drew investigative attention. Within 2 weeks of the disappearances, investigators discovered the buried remains and arrested Hall along with his accomplices. The evidence recovered from the burial site, combined with extensive witness testimony and electronic records, provided prosecutors with an overwhelming case. In February 2014, after a trial that had been moved to Hampton County due to the intense publicity in Berkshire County, Hall was convicted of multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. At his sentencing, Judge C. Jeffrey Kinder noted that in his entire judicial career, he had never encountered crimes as depraved as those committed by Hall, imposing 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Hall's legacy within Hell's Angels history represents the darkest manifestation of the club's evolution. Where earlier generations of outlaw bikers operated with a certain rough code that limited extreme violence to those directly involved in criminal conflicts, Hall's willingness to target innocent bystanders and employ torture reflected a new and more disturbing chapter in outlaw motorcycle culture. Like Alan Passaro, Hall represented the darker side of the Hells Angels, the calculated violence that maintained the club's fearsome reputation. Both men became infamous for specific acts of brutality that defined their legacy within outlaw biker history, though Passaro would later be acquitted in his most notorious case, while Hall's crimes led to his permanent imprisonment. Number 7. Alan Passaro. Alan Passaro forever etched his name in both Hells Angels lore and American cultural history through his role in one of rock music's darkest moments, the 1969 Altamont Free Concert. Born in the early 1940s, Passaro joined the Hells Angels San Francisco chapter in the mid-60s, quickly establishing himself as a tough enforcer willing to handle the club's most volatile situations. Unlike other infamous Hells Angels who built reputations through years of criminal activity, Passaro's notoriety stems primarily from a single incident that unfolded before hundreds of witnesses and was captured on film. On December 6, 1969, during the Rolling Stones performance at Altamont, Passaro fatally stabbed Meredith Hunter, an 18-year-old concert attendee who had drawn a gun near the stage. The incident occurred while the Hells Angels were providing security for the concert, an arrangement that proved disastrous as tensions escalated throughout the day. The killing was documented in the documentary film Gimme Shelter, showing Passaro repeatedly stabbing Hunter after the teenager produced a revolver. What makes Passaro's case unique is that he was acquitted of murder charges in 1971, with the jury accepting his claim of self-defense after viewing the documentary footage. The verdict remained controversial, with many questioning whether the Hells Angels should have been providing security in the first place. Passaro's early life offered few indications of the notorious figure he would become. Born into a working-class Italian-American family in the Bay Area, his childhood was unremarkable, except for an early aptitude for mechanical work and a rebellious streak that frequently brought him into conflict with authorities. Former classmates described a tough but not particularly violent teenager who found the rigid structures of 1950s America stifling and uninspiring. Like many young men of his generation seeking alternatives to conventional society, Passaro found his identity in California's emerging motorcycle culture. The freedom of the open road and the brotherhood of fellow riders provided both purpose and community that mainstream institutions had failed to offer. By the early 1960s, he had established himself in the Bay Area biker scene, known for his exceptional riding skills and mechanical knowledge, but not yet associated with the extreme violence that would later define his reputation. This psychological profile made Passaro particularly valuable during the complex social dynamics of late 1960s San Francisco. As the Hells Angels navigated relationships with the emerging counterculture, sometimes as allies, sometimes as antagonists, Passaro's ability to maintain composure in volatile situations allowed him to serve as an effective interface between these worlds. He could move comfortably between the Angels' clubhouse, Haight-Ashbury gatherings, and music venues without either abandoning the Angels' intimidating presence or creating unnecessary confrontations. This liminal position between outlaw biker culture and the hippie scene ultimately placed Passaro at the center of the defining tragedy of the era. When the Rolling Stones sought security for their free concert at Altamont Speedway in December 1969, the unusual decision to hire the Hells Angels was facilitated by the relationships the club had established with countercultural figures like the Grateful Dead. While some accounts suggest the Angels were to be paid in beer, others indicate a more formal arrangement with specific security responsibilities. What became immediately clear was that the Angels' approach to security bore no resemblance to professional concert staffing. Heavily intoxicated on beer and amphetamines, armed with weighted pool cues they called pool sticks, the bikers responded to perceived violations of stage boundaries with immediate and excessive violence. Throughout the day, tensions escalated as the Angels beat concertgoers for minor infractions, creating an atmosphere of fear and hostility that directly contradicted the peace and love ethos the event was meant to embody. By the time the Rolling Stones took the stage as the headline act, the situation had deteriorated into what one witness described as a nightmare of bad vibes and bloody violence. The crowd, numbering over 300,000 and densely packed in the natural amphitheater, pressed forward toward the low stage, while the Angels formed a human barrier that became increasingly aggressive as their territory was compressed. Meredith Hunter's fatal encounter with Passaro unfolded against this backdrop of escalating chaos. Hunter, an 18-year-old from Berkeley attending with his white girlfriend Patty Brederhoft, had already been involved in an earlier altercation with Angels who had pushed him away from the stage. Witnesses reported racial slurs directed at Hunter during this initial confrontation, raising questions about whether his race played a role in the Angels' response to his presence near the stage. When Hunter returned to the stage area during the Rolling Stones performance, the situation rapidly escalated to violence. Documentary footage captured the critical moments, Hunter drawing what appears to be a revolver, and Passaro rushing toward him with a knife, delivering multiple stab wounds before Hunter collapsed into the crowd. While some witness accounts suggest Hunter raised the gun in response to being attacked, others claim he had drawn the weapon first, creating the threat to which Passaro responded. The killing became the defining moment of Altamont, transforming what was intended as a West Coast equivalent to Woodstock into what the Rolling Stone magazine would later describe as rock and roll's all-time worst day. More broadly, many cultural historians have identified the incident as symbolic of the counterculture's loss of innocence, the moment when the idealistic vision of peace and love collided fatally with the darker realities of American society. Passaro's subsequent murder trial became a cultural spectacle in its own right. The unprecedented availability of documentary evidence, the killing had been captured by multiple cameras filming for what would become the documentary Gimme Shelter, created a unique legal situation where jurors could witness the actual events rather than relying solely on contradictory witness testimony. Defense attorney Michael Leonard built his case around this footage, arguing that it clearly showed Hunter drawing a gun before Passaro initiated physical contact. This visual evidence, combined with testimony from medical examiners confirming Hunter had methamphetamine in his system at the time of his death, formed the foundation of a classic self-defense claim. After deliberating for 12.5 hours, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty, accepting that Passaro had acted to protect himself and others from an armed threat. For Passaro himself, the acquittal provided legal vindication, but did little to normalize his life. Though he attempted to maintain a low profile in the years following Altamont, his association with the killing made him a recognizable figure in the Bay Area biker community. His post-Altamont years were marked by continuing legal troubles, including arrests for various offenses throughout the 1970s. These incidents suggested a man struggling to find stability after being defined by a single moment of violence. The final chapter of Passaro's life concluded as mysteriously as his most famous moment had been public. In March 1985, his body was discovered floating in Anderson Reservoir in southern Santa Clara County with $10,000 in his pocket. Though authorities described the death as kind of suspicious, no definitive determination of foul play was ever established. Theories ranged from a drug deal gone wrong to internal Hells Angels justice. But like many aspects of outlaw biker culture, the truth remained obscured behind the club's code of silence. Passaro's legacy exists primarily as a cultural touchstone, rather than for any organizational impact on the Hells Angels themselves. His actions at Altamont became inextricably linked with the broader narrative of the 1960s collapse. The moment when the counterculture's idealistic dreams confronted the harsh realities of violence, drugs, and social division that had always existed beneath the surface of American society. Passaro's connection to Ralph "Sonny" Barger lies in how both men represented the Hells Angels in the public eye, though in vastly different contexts. While Passaro became infamous through violence that shaped the club's dangerous reputation, Barger would emerge as the face and voice of the organization, representing how the club's public image would continue evolving decades after Altamont. Number 6. Ralph "Sonny" Barger.
Can you tell me who becomes a member of a motorcycle club? What's the kind of person that the lifestyle is?
Well, it's just a guy that likes to ride a motorcycle and sort of, have a free will and kind of lifestyle. Now, there's a lot of people that ride motorcycles that don't join clubs.
Ralph "Sonny" Barger stands as perhaps the most recognizable figure in Hells Angels history. A founding member of the Oakland chapter who transformed the club from a local motorcycle gang into an international phenomenon. Born in Modesto, California in 1938, Barger's influence on outlaw biker culture can hardly be overstated. After forming the Oakland chapter in 1957, Barger quickly emerged as a natural leader with unmatched charisma and strategic vision. While often misidentified as the founder of the Hells Angels, the club was actually established in 1948. He was undoubtedly its most influential member, unifying disparate chapters under a coherent structure and having the club incorporated in 1966. What separated Barger from other outlaw bikers was his understanding of image and media. Far from avoiding publicity, Barger embraced it, giving interviews, appearing in films, and carefully crafting the Hells Angels' public persona. His charismatic presence and articulate defense of the club helped transform its members from social outcasts into countercultural icons during the turbulent 1960s. Barger grew up in hardscrabble circumstances that would have broken many children. Born to a father who worked Oakland's docks by day and drowned his troubles in waterfront bars by night, Barger experienced maternal abandonment when he was just 4 months old. His father's subsequent remarriage provided no stability when his stepmother also abandoned the family, taking even basic possessions like the family radio when she left. This childhood instability fostered both independence and a deep yearning for belonging that would later manifest in Barger's devotion to creating and maintaining the brotherhood ethos of the Hells Angels. Former schoolmates remembered a boy who rebelled against authority, not with blind rage, but with calculated defiance, consistently pushing boundaries while remaining just charming enough to avoid the harshest consequences. After a brief stint in the army, from which he received an honorable discharge after his underage enlistment was discovered, Barger returned to Oakland and purchased his first motorcycle. The freedom of the open road provided not just transportation, but identity, a means of distinguishing himself in a society that offered few paths to significance for working-class young men without formal education. What truly distinguished Barger from other outlaw bikers of his era was his sophisticated understanding of public relations and organizational development. Where many chapter presidents focused narrowly on local concerns and immediate gratification, Barger envisioned the Hells Angels as a national and eventually international organization with standardized practices, protected intellectual property, and a carefully cultivated public image. This long-term vision manifested in several critical initiatives that transformed the Hells Angels from a local curiosity into a global phenomenon. In 1966, Barger orchestrated the formal incorporation of the Hells Angels name and logo, creating legal protections for their intellectual property that would later generate significant revenue through licensing and merchandise. This move demonstrated a business acumen rare among outlaw bikers, who typically disdained such straight legal maneuvers. Barger's leadership faced its greatest test during the infamous Altamont concert in December 1969, when violence erupted and Hell's Angel Alan Passaro fatally stabbed concert-goer Meredith Hunter. The incident threatened to permanently brand the club as mindless thugs rather than countercultural rebels. Barger's response demonstrated both his tactical acumen and media savvy. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Barger navigated the increasing criminalization of the Hells Angels with the same strategic intelligence that had marked his earlier leadership. As the club expanded its activities into more profitable but legally risky areas like drug trafficking and extortion, Barger maintained plausible deniability while providing guidance that balanced profit against risk. This delicate balancing act allowed the organization to thrive financially while avoiding the wholesale prosecutions that destroyed many other criminal organizations. Perhaps his greatest personal challenge came in the early 1980s, when he was diagnosed with throat cancer after decades of heavy smoking. The subsequent laryngectomy left him breathing through a valve in his neck and forced him to cover this opening to speak. This physical limitation would have destroyed the authority of a leader who relied primarily on physical intimidation. For Barger, whose leadership had always depended more on strategic intelligence and charismatic presence, it did little to diminish his standing within the organization. Barger's later decades revealed yet another dimension of his complex character as he leveraged his notorious reputation into legitimate business ventures. His best-selling 2000 autobiography, Hell's Angel: The Life and Times of Sonny Barger and the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, transformed him from underground legend to mainstream author, while his subsequent books on motorcycling philosophy and culture established him as something of an elder statesman within biker culture. When Barger died from liver cancer in 2022 at the age of 83, the extensive mainstream media coverage reflected his success in transcending the typical fate of outlaw figures. Rather than dying violently or disappearing into obscurity, he had managed the nearly impossible feat of remaining relevant and influential for over 6 decades, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining the core identity that had first distinguished him in 1950s Oakland. Like Walter the Nurget Stadnik, Barger's influence extended far beyond his local chapter to shape the entire organization's direction and identity. Both men understood that the Hells Angels' survival depended on adapting to changing times while maintaining the core values and mystique that made the club legendary in outlaw culture. Number 5. Walter the Nurget Stadnik. Walter the Nurget Stadnik emerged as one of the most influential figures in the Canadian Hells Angels during a period of unprecedented expansion in the 1980s and 1990s. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, Stadnik's unassuming physical presence, he stood just 5 feet 5 inches tall, belied his extraordinary impact on outlaw biker culture across Canada. Unlike many high-profile Hells Angels who cultivated a flamboyant image, Stadnik operated with remarkable discretion. His nickname, the Nurget, derived from nugget due to his small stature, became ironic given his massive influence within the organization. What Stadnik lacked in physical intimidation, he more than compensated for with strategic brilliance and diplomatic skill. Stadnik's greatest accomplishment came in the late 1980s when he orchestrated the expansion of the Hells Angels throughout Canada. As national president of the Canadian Hells Angels from 1988 onward, he methodically approached regional biker gangs, convincing them to patch over to become Hells Angels chapters. This expansion strategy transformed the club from a regional curiosity into Canada's dominant outlaw motorcycle organization. His rise to power began far from the glamorous criminal underworld typically associated with outlaw bikers. Growing up in a working-class family in Hamilton, Stadnik developed an early fascination with motorcycle culture that provided escape from the industrial monotony surrounding him. While still a teenager, he joined local motorcycle clubs, quickly distinguishing himself through both riding skill and natural leadership qualities that belied his diminutive stature. Stadnik's entry into serious outlaw biker culture came through the Hamilton-based North End Gang, which evolved into the Satan's Choice Motorcycle Club, at the time one of Canada's most powerful outlaw biker organizations. Despite his youth and physical size, Stadnik rose rapidly through the ranks, demonstrating exceptional strategic thinking and conflict resolution skills. Former associates noted his ability to see multiple steps ahead, anticipating both threats and opportunities long before they became apparent to others. His partnership with Maurice Mom Boucher proved particularly consequential for the Canadian criminal landscape. In 1988, Stadnik appointed Boucher as his Quebec lieutenant, creating an alliance that combined Stadnik's strategic vision with Boucher's charismatic leadership and willingness to employ extreme violence. Together, they transformed the Canadian Hells Angels from a collection of somewhat disorganized chapters into a highly coordinated criminal enterprise with unprecedented national reach. Unlike Boucher, whose flamboyant style and public profile generated media headlines, Stadnik preferred operating in the shadows. He rarely gave interviews, avoided unnecessary public appearances, and maintained a deliberately modest lifestyle that attracted minimal attention from law enforcement. This low-key approach reflected his understanding that sustainability required discretion, a lesson many of his more flamboyant contemporaries learned too late as their high profiles attracted targeted investigations. What made Stadnik particularly dangerous was his business acumen. He recognized that the club's long-term survival required moving beyond traditional biker crime into more sophisticated and lucrative criminal enterprises. Under his guidance, the Canadian Hells Angels diversified into financial crimes, legitimate business fronts, and complex money laundering operations that generated millions while minimizing exposure to prosecution. Stadnik's leadership faced its greatest test during the Quebec Biker War of the 1990s, when the Hells Angels engaged in a bloody conflict with the rival Rock Machine Club over control of drug trafficking territories. While Boucher garnered headlines for his flamboyant violence in Montreal, Stadnik operated behind the scenes, coordinating national strategy and ensuring that chapters across Canada provided necessary support to their Quebec brothers. In 2004, Stadnik's carefully constructed empire began to crumble when he was convicted on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, gangsterism, and drug trafficking. Sentenced to 14 years in prison, his incarceration marked the end of an era for the Canadian Hells Angels, though the organizational structure he created continued to function effectively in his absence. Stadnik's legacy as a strategic visionary would find a powerful counterpoint in George Christie, who approached Hells Angels leadership with a dramatically different philosophy focused on public perception rather than covert expansion. Number 4. George Christie.
The wheels start turning and he starts thinking, you know, this guy's a Hells Angel, but I think I can take him. And as the drinks go down, he gets a little bit braver and his muscles get a little bit more bigger. And then it reaches a point when you have to educate him and put everything back in perspective for him.
George Christie embodied a new archetype within the Hells Angels hierarchy, an articulate, media-savvy leader who helped transform the club's public image while expanding its influence throughout Southern California. As the longtime president of the Ventura chapter, Christie combined old-school biker loyalty with a sophisticated understanding of politics, public relations, and legitimate business that few of his contemporaries could match. Born in 1947 to Greek immigrant parents, Christie's path to the Hells Angels began after serving in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves. His early years gave little indication of the outlaw biker leader he would become. Raised in a relatively stable working-class family, Christie demonstrated both intellectual capacity and entrepreneurial instincts from an early age. Former classmates recalled a charismatic young man who displayed natural leadership qualities without the violent tendencies that characterized many future Hells Angels. Christie's entry into motorcycle culture came through legitimate channels rather than criminal associations. His exceptional mechanical skills and genuine passion for riding earned him respect in Southern California's motorcycle community during the late 1960s and early 1970s. This period coincided with the Hells Angels' transition from countercultural curiosity to established criminal organization, a transition Christie would significantly influence through his unique approach to leadership. He founded the Ventura chapter in the late 1970s, building it into one of the most stable and financially successful branches in the organization. Unlike many chapter presidents who ruled through intimidation, Christie cultivated a reputation for thoughtful leadership and strategic vision. Chapter members described a leader who prioritized long-term stability over short-term profit, carefully evaluating potential criminal ventures for their risk-reward ratio, rather than impulsively pursuing immediate gains. What truly distinguished Christie was his understanding of public perception. While many Hells Angels avoided media attention, Christie actively engaged with journalists, filmmakers, and community leaders, presenting himself as the reasonable face of an organization widely feared by the public. This approach proved remarkably effective in neutralizing negative publicity and fostering relationships with local authorities who might otherwise have targeted the club. Christie's public relations strategy extended beyond mere rhetoric to substantive community engagement. Under his leadership, the Ventura chapter organized charity events, toy drives for underprivileged children, and motorcycle safety programs that generated positive media coverage while establishing connections with legitimate business and political figures. These activities created a valuable buffer of public goodwill that complicated law enforcement efforts to target the chapter. His diplomatic skills proved particularly valuable during periods of tension with rival motorcycle clubs. Where other leaders might have immediately resorted to violence, Christie often sought negotiated solutions that minimized bloodshed while protecting the Angels' interests. This pragmatic approach earned him respect even from the club's enemies, who recognized him as a man whose word could be trusted. Christie's 35-year tenure with the Hells Angels ended controversially in 2011 when he resigned and returned his patches, a virtually unprecedented act within the club's culture of lifetime loyalty. His departure sparked rumors of internal conflicts, particularly with Sonny Barger, whose more traditional approach to club leadership often clashed with Christie's modernizing vision. After leaving the Hells Angels, Christie capitalized on his unique insider perspective by writing memoirs, giving lectures, and consulting on television productions about outlaw biker culture. His 2016 book, Exile on Front Street: My Life as a Hells Angel and Beyond, provided unprecedented insights into the organization's internal dynamics, leadership conflicts, and criminal operations. Revelations that earned him the enmity of former brothers who considered him a traitor to their code of silence. While Christie's media-savvy leadership style revolutionized the Hells Angels' public image in California, across the country on the East Coast, Charles "Doc" Pasciuti was simultaneously transforming the club through a different approach focused on organizational efficiency and criminal methodology. Number 3. Charles "Doc" Pasciuti. Charles "Doc" Pasciuti emerged as one of the most influential East Coast Hells Angels during the club's critical expansion period of the 1980s. As president of the Lowell, Massachusetts chapter, the first Hells Angels chapter established on the East Coast in 1966, Pasciuti guided the club through a period of unprecedented growth and sophistication that transformed their operations from disorganized criminal activities to structured enterprise. Unlike the stereotypical biker dropout, Pasciuti possessed considerable intelligence and education, hence the nickname Doc, which he applied to modernizing the club's operations. His background deviated significantly from the typical Hells Angels recruitment pattern. Growing up in a middle-class New England family with strong academic expectations, Pasciuti initially followed a conventional path, completing some college education before his fascination with motorcycle culture and outlaw lifestyle drew him into the biker world. Under his leadership, the Lowell chapter evolved from traditional biker crime, like theft and assault, into more lucrative ventures, particularly methamphetamine distribution throughout New England. Pasciuti recognized the significant profit potential in controlling regional drug markets, but understood that successful narcotics distribution required logistical precision, quality control, and territorial management beyond the capabilities of disorganized bikers operating independently. What distinguished Pasciuti from his predecessors was his organizational vision. He implemented a corporate-style structure within the chapter, with clear chains of command, specialized roles, and systematic profit sharing that increased both loyalty and efficiency. This approach transformed a loose collection of outlaws into a disciplined criminal organization that maximized profits while minimizing legal exposure. Paciuti's sophistication extended to his security measures. Recognizing increasing law enforcement attention, he implemented counter-surveillance procedures, used coded communication, and compartmentalized information to frustrate investigators. He personally vetted every prospective member, ensuring they possessed the discipline and discretion necessary for the club's evolving operations. Perhaps Paciuti's most significant innovation was his approach to financial management. Recognizing that visible wealth attracted both tax authorities and criminal investigations, he established elaborate money laundering operations through seemingly legitimate businesses owned by chapter members and associates. These businesses, including motorcycle repair shops, bars, and construction companies, provided both laundering mechanisms for drug profits and legitimate income that members could report to tax authorities. Despite his precautions, Paciuti's reign ended in 1991 when he and 12 other members of the Lowell chapter were indicted on charges of conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. The operation had functioned across Massachusetts and New Hampshire for years, generating millions in profit before authorities managed to infiltrate the network through undercover agents and informants who gradually gained sufficient trust to access the operation's inner workings. In January 1993, Paciuti pleaded guilty and received a 15-year prison sentence, the harshest among the defendants, reflecting his leadership role. Even from prison, he maintained influence over club operations through coded messages and loyal intermediaries, ensuring the systems he had established continued functioning in his absence. The sophisticated criminal infrastructure that Paciuti established would later influence a new generation of Hells Angels leaders, including John Anthony Beale, who would further refine these organizational principles for the challenges of the early 21st century. Number 2. John Anthony Beale. John Anthony Beale rose to prominence as the president of the North Beach Hells Angels chapter during the early 2000s, establishing himself as a new breed of outlaw biker leader who combined traditional Hells Angels loyalty with business acumen rarely seen in previous generations. His leadership style reflected the club's evolution from chaotic rebels to sophisticated criminal entrepreneurs, operating in an increasingly complex legal landscape. Unlike many Hells Angels who entered the club directly from street-level crime, Beale brought considerable legitimate business experience to his role. Before his full immersion in outlaw biker culture, he had operated several successful construction companies, experience that proved invaluable in establishing legitimate fronts for the chapter's less legal activities. This background gave him insights into financial management and organizational structure that most of his predecessors lacked. What distinguished Beale from traditional Hells Angels leadership was his approach to risk management. Rather than embracing the flashy, high-profile lifestyle that had drawn law enforcement attention to previous leaders, Beale maintained a relatively low public profile. He drove modest vehicles, lived in an unassuming home, and avoided the ostentatious displays of wealth that had proven fatal to many of his predecessors. Beale's strategic vision extended to diversifying the chapter's revenue streams beyond traditional Hells Angels activities. While maintaining the drug distribution networks that had long been the club's financial backbone, he expanded into more sophisticated ventures, including credit card fraud, identity theft, and strategic investments in legitimate businesses that provided both income and laundering opportunities. This diversification strategy reflected Beale's understanding that sustainability required adaptability. As law enforcement agencies developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for targeting traditional biker crimes, Beale recognized the need to develop criminal enterprises that were both more profitable and less vulnerable to conventional investigative approaches. By maintaining a portfolio of criminal activities rather than relying on a single revenue stream, he ensured that the chapter could withstand disruption to any particular operation. What made Beale particularly effective was his understanding of compartmentalization. He structured the chapter's operations so that knowledge was strictly limited based on necessity. Members involved in drug distribution knew nothing about identity theft operations. while those handling money laundering through legitimate businesses remained separate from those conducting more violent enforcement activities. This approach minimized the damage potential informants or undercover officers could cause, as no single member possessed comprehensive knowledge of the chapter's full operations. Despite his caution, Beale's operation collapsed in July 2003 when he was indicted on federal drug and firearm charges following an extensive ATF investigation. Undercover agents had infiltrated allied motorcycle clubs, gathering evidence about cocaine transactions conducted at the Hells Angels clubhouse. The subsequent raids uncovered multiple firearms, ammunition, a bulletproof vest, and methamphetamine. The operation that brought down Beale was part of a coordinated nationwide investigation targeting the Hells Angels, resulting in simultaneous actions across multiple East Coast states. This comprehensive approach reflected law enforcement's evolution from targeting individual criminals to dismantling entire organizational structures, a strategy that proved particularly effective against the increasingly sophisticated club operations that leaders like Beale had established. Beale's legacy within Hells Angels history represents both the organization's evolution and its limitations. While his business acumen and risk management strategies demonstrated how outlaw motorcycle clubs could adapt to changing law enforcement techniques, his ultimate failure highlighted the inherent vulnerability of criminal organizations to prolonged, coordinated investigation. Even the most sophisticated criminal security measures proved insufficient against the resources of federal agencies determined to dismantle the Hells Angels operations. Despite Beale's sophisticated approach to criminal enterprise management, the Hells Angels' reputation for extreme violence persisted largely due to figures operating on the organization's periphery. Number 1. David Chalou.
Jury in Hamden Superior Court found David Chalou guilty on Friday of 3 counts of murder, kidnapping, and intimidation of a witness. The jury ruled that Chalou kidnapped and then killed David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell to prevent them from testifying against Adam Lee Hall, a ranking member of the Hells Angels. Hall was found guilty of...
David Chalou represents one of the most disturbing manifestations of Hells Angels adjacent criminality, a figure whose actions shocked even those familiar with outlaw biker violence. Though not a patched member of the Hells Angels, Chalou's close association with Sergeant-at-Arms Adam Lee Hall and participation in one of the most notorious Hells Angels-linked crimes in recent decades earned him a place in outlaw motorcycle club infamy. Born in 1967 in the industrial suburbs of Boston, Chalou's early life foreshadowed his eventual path into extreme violence. Former classmates described a youth marked by erratic behavior, explosive anger, and an unsettling fascination with inflicting pain on others. By his mid-teens, he had accumulated a juvenile record for assault, weapons possession, and animal cruelty, warning signs that would later mature into a disturbing capacity for human violence. Chalou's first significant encounters with the criminal justice system came during his early 20s, resulting in a prison sentence for armed robbery where he formed his critical connection with the Aryan Brotherhood. Prison transformed Chalou from a disorganized street criminal into a disciplined, ideologically motivated enforcer. Fellow inmates noted his methodical approach to violence, clinical rather than emotional, and his apparent immunity to the psychological toll that inflicting extreme harm typically produces in most individuals. His imposing physical presence, standing 6 feet 5 inches and heavily muscled, made him an intimidating enforcer, while his prison background provided him with connections across multiple criminal organizations. Prison psychologists who interviewed Chalou during this period documented troubling indications of antisocial personality disorder with sadistic tendencies, noting his pronounced lack of empathy combined with an unusual degree of calculated control during violent episodes. What distinguished Chalou was his apparent lack of moral boundaries. Where even many hardened criminals followed certain codes limiting violence against innocent civilians, Chalou displayed a willingness to target anyone without hesitation or remorse. This reputation made him valuable to Hells Angels members, requiring particularly brutal enforcement, even as the club maintained official distance to preserve deniability. Upon his release from prison in 2009, Chalou quickly established connections within the Western Massachusetts criminal underworld. offering his services as an enforcer and debt collector to various organizations. His reputation for extreme methods ensured compliance from targets who understood that refusing Shalu's demands would result in consequences beyond conventional criminal violence. His relationship with Adam Lee Hall, Sergeant-at-Arms of the Berkshire County Hells Angels chapter, proved particularly consequential. Their connection reportedly began when Hall witnessed Shalu's methods during a debt collection at a Pittsfield bar, where Shalu's calculated intimidation extracted payment from a debtor who had resisted previous efforts. Impressed by Shalu's combination of psychological manipulation and controlled violence, Hall began employing him for increasingly sensitive operations. When Hall determined that David Glasser needed to be eliminated to prevent him from testifying in an upcoming trial, Shalu was recruited for the operation. The subsequent triple murder, eliminating not just Glasser, but also his roommate Edward Frampton and their friend Robert Chadwell as potential witnesses, demonstrated Shalu's complete disregard for human life. The brutality of the crime shocked even veteran investigators. According to court documents, the victims were kidnapped from Frampton and Glasser's apartment in the early hours of August 28, 2011, during the aftermath of Tropical Storm Irene. They were taken to an isolated location where they were tortured before being killed. The bodies were then dismembered with power tools before being buried in a trench on private property in Beckett, Massachusetts. During the subsequent trial, evidence suggested that Shalu had taken particular pleasure in the killings, exhibiting behavior that prosecutors described as demonstrating a level of sadism beyond even what was necessary to accomplish the murders. Witness testimony indicated that Shalu had extended the suffering of at least one victim, despite Hall's instructions for a quick execution, suggesting that his motivation extended beyond mere criminal necessity to personal gratification. This extreme violence represented a significant departure from traditional Hells Angels operations, which typically limited extreme measures to direct threats from rival gangs or informants directly involved in club business. By targeting not only Glasser, but also two witnesses whose only crime was being present at the wrong time, Shalu and Hall crossed a line that shocked even hardened criminals within the outlaw biker community. Investigative journalist Michael Johnson, who covered the case extensively, noted, "There was genuine revulsion among some Hells Angels when details of the murders emerged. The club has its own twisted code, but killing disabled witnesses who posed no direct threat violated even their distorted ethics." Several members privately expressed concerns that such extreme violence would bring the kind of heat that could destroy chapters across the Northeast. The investigation that followed revealed the limitations of even the most careful criminal planning. Despite Hall and Shalu's efforts to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence, investigators quickly identified them as suspects based on their history with Glasser and previous threats against him. The discovery of the victims' remains in a shallow grave on private property, combined with electronic evidence and testimony from associates who had knowledge of the crime, provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence for conviction. In 2014, following a trial that captivated and horrified Western Massachusetts, Shalu was convicted of 3 counts of murder, 3 of kidnapping, and 3 of intimidation of a witness. The judge imposed 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring Shalu would never return to society. During sentencing, the judge noted that the murders demonstrated a depravity that defies comprehension, particularly given that 2 of the victims had developmental disabilities and posed no threat beyond their potential witness status. Shalu's case illustrates the complex ecosystem surrounding outlaw motorcycle clubs, where official members often work with non-patched associates to maintain separation between the club and particularly egregious crimes. This arrangement allows the organization to preserve deniability, while still benefiting from the services of individuals willing to commit acts that might otherwise bring unwanted attention. The fallout from Shalu's crimes extended beyond his own imprisonment. The Berkshire County chapter of the Hells Angels never recovered from the scandal and intense law enforcement scrutiny that followed. Membership declined dramatically as potential recruits avoided association with the chapter, while existing members transferred to other regions or abandoned the club entirely. By 2017, the chapter had effectively ceased operations. its clubhouse in Lee eventually sold to cover legal expenses and civil judgments resulting from the murders. While figures like Maurice Mom Boucher fundamentally shaped the Hells Angels through organizational leadership and strategic vision, Chaloux represents the violent fringe that has maintained the club's fearsome reputation. Both aspects have contributed to the Hells Angels' enduring status as the world's most notorious outlaw motorcycle club, an organization whose influence on criminal subculture and popular imagination continues to reverberate decades after its formation.